you can hear me great. Okay, cool. So nice to meet you all. I think, my goal for this talk was to kind of just reminisce, get into my feelings a bit. The reason why I knew the answer, if you caught it earlier, to how long ng-conf has been going was because I came here, the first ng-conf, 10 years ago, around, right at the beginning of my career, really, more or less. It's really kind of topical, I guess, the talk over here, because I do kind of think back to those days, think about today, think about the changes we've had in the industry, in myself, in the career. Myself for a lot. There's a picture of me at the second ng-conf website with dreads and a helmet on and goggles. If you ever can see that and look it up, you'll see it. It's because we went skiing the first time. And I've changed very much since then. But I think that's kind of the idea. You know, you're supposed to change constantly. And it can be kind of hard and weird. And we have a lot of feelings about it. So I kind of want to explore sort of my journey as a developer, the changes I saw, the experience with change, just kind of talk about it. You know, like I said, get into my feelings a bit. So I'll start off talking about like my early career and kind of. I think I was very judgmental about other senior developers for a particular reason. And then I kind of fell in the same trap, I think, later on. And after all that, I realized that empathy is integral. And, I'll get into Angular a bit. I'll talk a bit about it, Angular and it's changing. An example of how it's changing. And, what do we do with change? How do I deal with change? How do I feel about change? How do I get excited about change? Life is always changing. So, when I started off as a developer, I had a couple stints before my current job, but I've been with this job now for just over 10 years. And, ng-conf's been happening for just over 10 years. And, I remember that earlier version of myself, I was very, very excited and very, very much, overwhelmed with so much to learn. Even back then, 10 years ago, it was like so much. But I loved it. It was so exciting. It was so I think I've always liked learning. I always liked the excitement of learning. Well, just learning the things I liked. No one likes to learn things they don't like, right? So it was very fun and exciting, and I was like, wow, this is so great, and I'm surrounded by people who love it too, right? Not necessarily, and I can get why to some degree. It was very overwhelming too, having to learn all these things. Like you constantly had to figure out, oh, cool, we went from, jQuery to Angular to React to Angular 2 to web containers to server-side rendering to client-side rendering back to server-side rendering again. It was constantly overwhelming. What do I do first? How do I start my journey of learning and growth? That's. I think every time you learn a certain thing, it kind of opens doors for new things. Yeah, and it's just never ending. You almost want to feel like you've completed the journey of learning. That's it. I've got everything, nothing else is going to change. I've completed it. I know everything now, and I can just use that to succeed. And, I think it's not really how it works. As soon as you kind of master anything, I feel like it's especially right when you master it, it becomes, or starts to become obsolete. And that's honestly sincerely hard. Emotionally, you commit so much of your time and energy, often as developers, we spend our time outside of our 9 to 5, just throwing ourselves at these things to master them. And then when they're suddenly, less valuable or less important, you feel like you've wasted your time to some degree. You feel like you've, bet on the wrong horse, or you feel like even you were too late to really enjoy that swell of achievement that you would hoping would come with that mastery. You might feel those things, but it still pays off, no matter what. Even if that all happens and you completely move on from that technology, something has been gained from that. Something has been really deeply integrated into you as a person. And it's a very powerful thing. And I think that's one of the things I want to talk about, is kind of remembering that when things change. And that's something I have to tell myself a lot. So one of the things I remember very clearly is thinking, when I was really, really new, is why did the seniors not have the same excitement and wide-eyed thrill that I seem to have with learning new technology? They were ugh. I think that was a very common term or word I heard whenever people would learn a new thing, or a new thing would come out. They were just no, we don't need it. Let's just go back to Ruby or just pure JavaScript before the ES5 stuff. Let's just go simple. And I never really got it. I'm like, this is better. This is cooler. This is more interesting. And I think I'd almost like get in trouble sometimes with my senior developers I would work with. I was like, you know what? Look at this cool new technology I just found. Should we use this in our project? And they're like, no. What are you doing? Shh, quiet. Let's stick to this very simple, boring thing and let's use it forever. And I don't know, I got kind of like confused. I'm like, this is happening when you work for like a decade. A lot of my senior developers were like working for 10 years, 15 years as developers, and I was really new. And I was like, okay, I guess this is just what happens. Or you get old, I'm getting old now, but I'm not really old, but I thought maybe when you start to hit 25 or 35 or 45, those really old ages, you're like, oh, you slow down a bit. But I told myself, it doesn't matter how old I got, doesn't matter how long I worked as a developer, I would never turn into a curmudgeon. I would never be somebody who's like, get that new thing away from me. Let me stick to the old, tried and true. And I think to some degree that was true, especially early on. I had this energy, this desire to just kind of constantly learn new things, just push myself. I even did a whole stint teaching specifically. That was actually the most I've ever learned my whole life. Constantly changing, constantly time to do new things, having to educate myself, to educate other people. Very, very recommended, I think. Anybody should, if they want to learn, if they want to grow, teach. It's the best way to do so. But after all of that experience, I think I really kind of had my career take off. I had a lot of stability, a lot of opportunity. It was fantastic. And I don't know how long it took, maybe 5 years, 6 years in my career. Started to notice little tiny things. I remember when Angular 2 came out, I was like, oh, I just mastered Angular 1.5. 1.5 components were really cool. I kind of get it with the whole, I finally understood those different symbols for the inputs and outputs for components. I'm like, I get the ampersand now. I get the @ sign. I get what they do. And it just changed everything. And I was like, okay, well, that's something new to learn, I guess. And I was okay with it, but I had a little bit of those noises. Not quite fully, but just a touch. And then TypeScript was there. And I was like, oh God, TypeScript? I thought we didn't do types. That was the whole thing. It was the value proposition that I was kind of buying into, because I learned in C# and I was like, types are confusing. Great, no types, and came roaring back. I had to kind of just it's okay, types are good, types are great. And then the Angular 2 official release was even after the beta. A lot changed. I remember there was a particular thing the renderer, and it was renderer versus renderer 2. And I was like, I did all this specific stuff specifically to work around the renderer, and they changed it, and I was like, okay, that's fine. It's all right, it's okay, no problem at all. And then I remember we were using a lot of Redux after kind of going from the Flux pattern originally, and then NGRX came out, and it was kind of like Redux, but it was different enough that I was like, why can't it just be the same? Why do you have to change things? I kind of like ArcGIS. I was mastering it, but I was annoyed at this whole thing. And this whole journey was very, very exhausting. And I remember having this thought, why isn't everyone just doing exactly what I want to write? They should be writing code exactly like me. And then I kind of realized, oh God, it happened. I did the exact same thing that I was saying I wouldn't do. And I had to kind of ask myself, what do I do about it? And I think the first thing you do is just try to be empathetic to everyone. Yourself, other people. It's just integral, Our industry is inherently exhausting, sincerely. It's just nonstop. We come to these conferences all the time. We go to tons of conferences around the world because we have to constantly learn, keep up to date, keep up to snuff with the latest and greatest. And that's really, it's hard. It's wonderful. It's exciting. Don't get me wrong. I love doing this. I love meeting people. I love talking to people. I love the networking that comes from it. But it's just workshop, new thing. I didn't really fully get it, but I got to get it enough because I did another workshop in 10 minutes, and it's another new thing, and then just constantly having to absorb information when my brain feels full of information already. And you kind of have to accept something, you'll never, no one will ever know everything. You just won't. It's not gonna happen. I'm never gonna do it. No one else is gonna do it. And making peace with that is hard for a lot of people. It's hard for me, for sure. I would love to just be able to say to anybody who comes up to me, I have the answer for you for sure. I know exactly what to do. And I think I feel like the longer I develop, the less I can say that. Maybe I'm more understanding of the fact that I don't really know anything for sure, or maybe that it's changed and there's more things to know and I have less of a domain set of knowledge that's kind of encompassing everything. Who knows? I just know that's not happening. I have to be okay with that, you know? And yeah, like I mentioned before, like you might not always bet on the right horse. You might like put all your energy and effort into a particular like specific framework that was like it was the bee's knees for like 2 years. You master it, you're great, you've been like, you know, open source, like committing to the repository, you're doing all these great stuff, and then suddenly it just like goes away. And then you're just like, well, should I bet on this competitor, which is now really popular? It happens. You know, it's fine. And you learn a lot from that. It's okay. And, you know, there's plenty more to learn after that. There's plenty more to grow. And I think those experiences really kind of made me look at those previous developers I had that I thought were curmudgeons with a brand new empathetic light. There's a reason why they were curmudgeon-y. They probably had those same exact experiences that I did. And it's not that they were curmudgeon-y necessarily all the time. Sometimes they were like intelligently saying, don't do too much too fast. That was a lesson I learned as well. But also, you know, they were probably just exhausted. Like, I felt exhausted sometimes. I think we probably all burnt out 1 to 2 or 3 times in our lives because it's just a constant influx of learning and doing and getting bigger and better, and it is a lot. And sometimes it's okay just to be like, no, thank you. Just you can't say that all the time, but if you can pick your battles and you feel exhausted and you're like, I can't learn another new thing, it's okay. Just be like, you know what? I'm not going to. I don't have to. This was a really important lesson for me because I felt like if I saw a new thing that I didn't know anything about, I had to add it to a list somewhere that I was writing down of things I have to learn. I don't have a list anymore. I just learn whatever I have to learn and whatever I think is interesting and compelling, and it's a little bit easier. And it's, I think, the only way you can do it because the list that anybody would have would be like miles long at this point. So the really important thing, though, I think this is true for teaching, this is true for, I think, most things in life. If you can find like a really passionate thing that makes you excited about, if something new comes out and it's like really cool, like right now, I'm really kind of playing around with like, well, AI, like who isn't? But also one new thing particularly I've been intrigued by is web containers. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That's really interesting. That's a really fun thing I can do a lot of really interesting stuff with. And so I'm trying to grab onto that passion and use it to fuel my desire to keep learning and keep growing and keep changing. And so if you can find anything that makes you feel that way, I'd say that's a great thing to add to any list that you are still writing. And, you know, and I think the important thing to remember is, you know, sometimes you get kind of annoyed at people, developers, companies who are like, here's a new thing. Here's Angular 3.0 in the future. Who knows what they're going to call it? 17, actually. So we're like at 18 coming up soon. So maybe they have a new name for a new technology. And if that happens, they have a reason for it. Anytime they make a change, they're not just doing it because they're like bored. They're doing it because there's a really valuable proposition to kind of provide you. Keeping that in your mind can keep those like annoyed voices from taking over your head, I think. You know, I think I'm going to just show you a quick example of me and how I kind of reacted when I saw this. I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, why? Why are you doing this? I feel comfortable. I feel good with templates as it is. And then I looked at it some more and I was like, you know what? I get it. It makes perfect sense. It's clear. It's much less code. It looks like JavaScript. I know JavaScript. So that first reaction I had of like surprise was sensible, knowing that, you know, everyone gets overwhelmed. And what I'm trying to really encourage is the second reaction I had of, oh, that's nice. That's good. That's cool. That's smart. And I think that can keep you from becoming somebody who you might not want to become, somebody who just doesn't want to learn anymore, somebody who doesn't want to get excited about things anymore. I think nobody wants to be that person, and it's really hard. So looking at things like this and recognizing when you kind of like have that jarring feeling, it's probably a good like canary in the coal mine. You know, if you feel those things, if you have those thoughts, you know, start to, if you like, if this is an important thing to you, try to have a more positive spin on everything. So like, you know, well, it's different. Why are they doing it? You know, number one, it's JavaScript. And that means it's easier to compile on JavaScript. That's great. It makes their lives easier. It makes bugs happen less. Awesome. You know, they listen to feedback. They literally was like, people are confused and overwhelmed by template-based specificity. And they like the idea of having less of that. So they made a change because people wanted it. And that's good. You know, that tells you that they're listening, which is very, very important to hear for any organization who's building frameworks that you rely on. You know, I think that people, and I think that, you know, trying to reduce the amount of overall code in any code base is actually one of the nicest things anyone can do. I feel like that's a really valuable way to write code. So the reduction of overhead, the reduction of anything is always a nicer thing to do. It may type checking easier. It made bundling easier. There's all these good reasons why. Performance, number one. Performance is king, queen, and everything, right? We always want to have performance be the reason why we do our things, make our changes, make significant efforts to rewrite our code. So, okay, they have good reasons for it. Now, what do I do about it? Well, do you need to update legacy code bases? Maybe. Depends on what the change is. Like, sometimes no. Sometimes it's okay. If it works and it's fine and you don't have to make a new thing, leave it, in my mind. But if it's a thing you're working with every single day, it might make sense to make an update if you go to a later version of Angular to start to make those changes. But that's effort, and that's something you should talk about with your whole team. Should you start training your organization? I think this is probably a good idea in general when something new happens like this. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but it can be a workshop. It can be something you do to get people excited. Like, hey, cool, let's learn about how input signals are really interesting, and we can kind of move away from input observables, which is something I've been using a lot. Why is it fun? Now we don't need setters and getters as much, or whatever it is that you're talking about. It can be a very exciting way to kind of get your whole organization to be on board. And when everyone's kind of on board, things are a little bit easier, like I mentioned, signals are great to learn. There's other things too you can learn. There's really a lot of things that are happening in Angular right now that are changing that are worth a little extra effort to kind of build into yourself. And surround yourself with people who are excited about it. This is a really valuable thing. If you're around people who are pumped, especially if they're juniors, which is great about juniors, they're often really pumped, you get a little of that contagiously, and that's really great. I mean, that's kind of something we chase after, at least I chase after now, that it comes less naturally. So yeah, be kind to yourself too. Take a deep breath, relax. Don't get overwhelmed, or try not to. You can't help it if you do. But if you can manage to kind of find a way to navigate it emotionally and to kind of relax and just be calm, it can really help you just get your North Star in line. I think it's normal to get annoyed at things changing, but think about the nice things, I love a feeling of a nice, fresh, greenfield project. Start from scratch, do whatever you want. Beautiful, oh, yes. Just like nothing there. That's a lovely feeling, and that's something you can do with change. There's, fun new things you can try out that you couldn't try out before. That's I would love to try out using input signals. I haven't really had a chance to do it properly yet, but I think that'd be really cool. So let's see how that combines with the new templates as well. That'd be really fun. Another great thing, no more Angular modules. I think no one had great feelings about modules, so that's great that that's kind of going away. I think that, easier statefulness is really cool. There's a lot of really great things that are happening. I mentioned input signals a lot because I love them so much. There's tons of really, really fun, interesting new features we're seeing in Angular right now that combined all together give you a completely different experience in a lot of good ways. So let's, think about change a bit more. It's going to keep changing. It's not going to stop changing today. There's 18's coming out in a couple of months. I'm sure there'll be changes in that. Software development is just never stops, just changes forever. It will always change. It'll constantly change. You kind of have to make peace with that to some degree. And kind of getting on top of that is going to be a thing that helps you succeed and survive for a very long time. I think life in itself is full of change. This world is very interesting, full of change, very, very complex, constant new things to think about. And when you can deal with that well, I think that's really healthy. It can be very draining, it can be very hard. So just don't burn out. I think that's what happens a lot when people are overwhelmed with change. Burnout is one of the first things that happens, or one of the worst things that happens. One of the two. I think that the nice, emotional thing is that change is also just beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. If life stagnated, we have that word is not a positive word. Change is the opposite of stagnation. So it's part of what makes things fun and exciting and beautiful, even if it's hard. And maybe that's part of what makes it fun and exciting and beautiful. So I think, how you react to change is often more important than whatever is actually changing. And that's really the hard thing to kind of internalize, but something I'm trying to do right now, and I want to keep doing for another 10 years. I'm not old yet, apparently. So I got to keep doing this for a long time before I retire. So I got to just keep it up. And yeah, that's it. That's my talk.